You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
Welcome back to the Asians in Hockey podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Nate Nickel. So last offseason, I officially launched a website for the show, asiansinhockey.com. Over there, you can listen to the podcast directly in your browser, check out links to some collected resources, such as Asian Hockey Card Collection, curated by our contributing producer, Chris Wu, and the online periodical Hockey in Society, edited by friend of the show, Courtney Cito. You can also write a review of the show right on the website, as well as leave me a voice note. If you're interested in dropping me a line, I would love to hear from you. And speaking of voice notes, I'm looking to collect sound bites from Asian hockey fans talking about their favorite teams. If you're interested in sharing your story with me, please feel free to record a voice note on the website. I just might feature your story in an upcoming episode. I will, of course, be adding more stuff to the website over the course of the season, so be sure to visit often. Once again, you can find the site at asiansinhockey.com. Before we drop the puck on today's episode, I've got a couple favors to ask of you. First off, if you'd like to help out with some of the production and operating costs, you can do that through buymeacoffee.com. Just visit coffee/asiansinhockey. That's coff.ee/asiansinhockey to make a donation. Now, to reiterate, I promise to never charge a subscription fee for the podcast, and I'm just grateful to you for listening. Second, if you've enjoyed what you've heard from us, I would love it if you could post a quick 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This is honestly the best way to get the word out about the show and to help us cultivate our audience. Thank you so much for your support. On today's episode, I'll be talking with former professional goaltender Paris O'Brien, who has played with the Kunlun Red Star of the KHL, Wilfrid Laurier University of U Sports, and the Chinese national team, famously earning a starting spot at the 2022 Beijing Olympics. My conversation with Paris was incredibly insightful, and I hope you enjoy hearing his story and journey as an Asian hockey player in Canada and his experience playing on one of the biggest stages in the world, the Winter Olympics. I will also be taking a look at a few key players in both the NHL and PWHL and how things are looking for them so far this season. All of that is coming up right after this.
Great news! The Korean Drama Podcast is back for our 6th season.
The Korean Drama Podcast is the podcast about watching Korean dramas by people who don't watch Korean dramas. Hosted by Candace, Jane, and me, Kim.
Wait, if it's our 6th season, can we still say we're people who don't watch Korean dramas?
I'm sure it's fine. Let's just call it character development, which we love in K-dramas.
For our new season, we're recapping the hit 2025 romantic fantasy series Heavenly Ever After, about an elderly couple who reunite in the afterlife. Only he's now in his 30s while she's chosen to appear in her 80s.
Awkward.
So join us each week as we discuss the highs and lows of the afterlife in Heavenly Ever After, episode by episode.
Part of the Potluck Podcast Collective.
Welcome back to the show. So, for our player highlights, we'll start things off with the PWHL. There isn't a whole lot to cover as the season has just started, but we do have a few players that we can look at. As a rookie, Nicole Gosling has been putting in a lot of ice time for the Montreal Victoire, averaging almost 21 minutes per game. She's a defender, so her offensive output is low, but she does have 3 blocks and a hit so far this season. Both Anna Saghetti and Katie Chen have been putting in some rookie ice time for the Vancouver Golden Eyes as well, but their numbers are also a bit on the lower side. We're still a few games into the season, so I wouldn't put much stock into these stats just yet. And then there's Kimberly Newell, who also plays for Vancouver as their 3rd goaltender. She has yet to start a game this season, but during the preseason, she came on in relief of Kristen Campbell and made 3 saves on 4 shots in her 3rd period appearance against Seattle that night. Okay, let's head over to the NHL. Since we covered Jason Robertson, Kyler Yamamoto, and Nick Suzuki last time, I won't go into their stats this episode, and instead we'll take a look at a few other Asian NHLers. Starting off this week, we'll talk about Nick Robertson. So far this season, Nick is averaging just under 13 minutes per game and has 6 goals and 6 assists in his 28 games this year for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Right here in Newark, Jonas Siegenthaler has 2 assists for the Devils and is averaging 19 minutes and 33 seconds per game across 31 games so far this season. He's putting up some decent defensive numbers with 58 blocks and 46 hits so far this season. Matt Dumba has put in just under 15 minutes per game in his 11 games with the Pittsburgh Penguins this season. He's notched a goal and 2 assists for 3 points and has 12 blocks and 16 hits so far this year. Out in Los Angeles, Cody Ceci has a goal and 5 assists for 6 points with the Kings this season. Across his 30 games this season, he's averaging 17 minutes and 34 seconds and has 39 blocks and 15 hits. We also have an update on Zane Parekh, who hasn't played since his injury at the beginning of November. He was just activated today by the Calgary Flames from IR and sent on loan to Team Canada for the IHF World Juniors. We'll see if Calgary brings him back after the tournament or if they send him back to the OHL. And finally for today, we have Arshdeep Bains, the young rookie out in Vancouver. In his 26 games thus far, Bains has scored a goal and notched 4 assists for 5 points with the Canucks. We'll be keeping an eye on his progress throughout the season as well. Okay, let's move on to another topic: heated rivalry. So my wife and I started watching this show recently, and we've gotten through the first 3 episodes. The show is up to 4 episodes at the time I'm recording this, but I haven't gotten around to watching the latest episode just yet. Now, before I dive into my thoughts on the show, I want to point you to episode 5 of season 1 of the podcast, where I sat down with the author of the book series that the TV show is based on, Rachel Reed. It was a great conversation talking about representation in hockey media, so go check it out if you haven't listened to it already. Now, if you aren't already aware, Heated Rivalry is a new TV show on Crave in Canada and HBO Max in the US, and it's about professional hockey players who find themselves caught up in a gay romance. Now, the reason I bring it up here is because one of the 2 lead characters, Shane Hollander, is a half-Asian hockey player, making this show a bit of a landmark for Asian representation in scripted hockey media. Now, I don't have a whole lot to say about the show, but I do want to express how grateful I am that there's a TV show that portrays a hockey player of Asian descent on television. I also think the show has some massive cultural implications as a strong depiction of queer relationships in professional sports. Now, having said that, I do want to express some very minor frustrations and disappointments that I have with the show. Again, they're very minor. First, there's not a whole lot of hockey in the show. Now, I get that hockey is just a backdrop for the series and that it's not really a hockey show, but the marketing kind of paints it in a way that's quite hockey forward, and all of the main characters are professional hockey players. So I was kind of hoping for a bit more on-ice action, and there really isn't a whole lot to speak of, at least in the first 3 episodes. Also, the little bit of hockey that is portrayed in the first 3 episodes isn't terribly convincing. Now, it does help me suspend my disbelief a little bit with the fact that the show's version of the NHL isn't actually the NHL, but a fictional league called MLH, or Major League Hockey. Second, I'm not super invested in the romance between the 2 main characters, Shane Hollander and Ilya Rozanov. I find their communication terribly lacking and quite frustrating, and whatever they have going on between them is much more of a situationship than a romance. Now, I get that these 2 characters are closeted, so they do have to maintain secrecy in their relationship, but I was heavily invested in the romance between a couple of side characters who we follow in episode 3. And I do think that that romance was handled a whole lot better, and that communication between those characters and the chemistry between those two characters was a whole lot more palpable and, quite honestly, realistic. But I won't get into any more details about that, as I don't want to spoil anything else for you. My third and final disappointment doesn't actually have anything to do with the show itself, but more with the sort of representational concerns I have with hockey-based scripted media overall. I wish there were a family-friendly show that depicts players of Asian descent in prominent leadership roles. I would love for little Asian kids to be able to see themselves depicted as elite hockey players in a movie or TV show, but Heated Rivalry is definitely not that show. Let's just say it isn't exactly family friendly, and while I would definitely recommend the show to a whole lot of people, I would not recommend watching it with little kids around. Anyway, I do think there is a lot to like about the show and what it means for queer and Asian representation in hockey media. I hope this kind of momentum continues and we start seeing more and more shows like Heated Rivalry pop up. I also think something like Heated Rivalry for women would be nice to see, especially given the rapid growth of the PWHL. And sure, the storylines regarding staying closeted in a league where not a single out queer player exists wouldn't be part of that story, but I still think there's something worth exploring with queer women in hockey. Now, those are just my 2 or 25 cents on the matter. After the break, I'll be chatting with Paris O'Brien. Stay tuned.
Hungry for spicy food and even hotter conversations? Craving community and authentic storytelling? Then join the table. This is Minor Legends, a new comedy fiction podcast supported by Potluck. Pull up every week with me, Angela Wong Carbone, and follow the stories of me and my friends as we serve up tasty tales of what it means to be Asian American at our weekly dinner hang. If you enjoy deep dishing on absurd stereotypes like tiger moms who tutor your dating game rather than grades, the insanity of your parents' immigration story, to the legend of that one good Asian cousin you can never live up to, then pull up a seat and grab a plate. Featuring dinner guests like Ronnie Chang, Brian Park, Usama Siddiqui, Celia Au, Harry Young, Supriya Ganesh, and more. It's a tasty rotation that'll leave you belly laughing and steeped in relatable and spicy conversations. Can you take the heat? Listen now for free wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the show. Before we start chatting with today's guest, I just want to ask that if you're enjoying the show so far, I would love it if you could share the podcast with your friends. If it's safe for you to do so, go ahead and take out your phone right now and text your friends with a link to the podcast. Thanks. Okay, today I'm joined by Paris O'Brien, who was the goaltender for the Chinese national hockey team in 2022. And I'll let Paris kind of tell us more about his story. But first off, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me on the Asians in Hockey podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Nate. I think I'm really excited to be here on your show and kind of obviously, share the stories that I've experienced over the years playing hockey internationally as well as, locally and professional level. So, I kind of introduce myself, I guess. So my name is Paris O'Brien. I'm a professional hockey goaltender. I've played pro the last 4 years now overseas in the KHL, as well as I've represented the Chinese men's national team at the Olympics, as well as internationally at the IHF World Championships, where I've helped the team win gold and bronze. So it's kind of myself here. Very cool.
So let's go all the way back to the beginning, kind of. Mm-hmm. Well, so actually, let's talk a little bit about your identity. I'm going to start off with a question that's a little off script, but tell us a little bit about your own background as somebody who is biracially Chinese and French Canadian. What was that like for you growing up?
To be totally honest with you, I never really had a problem here. I live in Vancouver, Canada. So most of the community I live around was already predominantly Asian or mixed in some retrospect there. But and I grew up in a or surrounded by, Chinese culture a lot. So with my grandmother's side on my mom's side, but yeah, funny enough, my mom's actually she was born and raised in Fiji originally,
okay.
and then she immigrated to Canada later on when she was about 6 or 8 years old. And then my dad is actually from Quebec, from Montreal. So he immigrated to Vancouver after that. And then they had me and my brother. So that's kind of a little bit of background for that. As for kind of answering your question regarding, feeling, I don't think, to be honest with you, I grew up with a lot of, friends who were mixed. I mean, there was an odd time, especially with the hockey world, how it's predominantly white. It did feel a little bit of weird about that growing up, in an Asian household, or feeling, closer to my Asian heritage than my French Canadian side. So it was a little bit of that kind of mixed identity when it came to figuring out myself when I'm playing hockey. But I think in some ways it kind of helped the fact that as a goaltender, you're on your own little island anyways. So
Right.
it helped with that sense. But yeah, it's kind of the beginning of where I've come from. And then obviously minor hockey and whatnot from there.
So take us a little bit through that journey of growing up in Vancouver. What was it that drew you to playing goalie? It is a unique position, and if I'm not mistaken, you're the first full-time netminder that we've had on the show.
Okay.
Everyone else that I've interviewed has been
Awesome.
primarily a skater. I have had one person I've talked to who says she does play goalie, but she feels most comfortable on the wings. So you're our first time goalie. What drew you to that position?
I've got to say, first off, that's an honor being the first goaltender on the show. I think that's awesome to hear. Yeah, I mean, obviously for me, I started playing hockey when I was 6 years old. And I think at that age, they kind of put you in all the different positions. So you're trying to figure out what works for you. And I think, to be honest with you, I was just a better backwards skater than forwards from what I've been told from my parents and whatnot. My brother, actually, who's 4 years older than I am, played water polo as a goalie. So during the summer months, I played water polo with him. And then during winter, I played hockey. And he was also a goalie, like I mentioned. And how I think in some ways I just fell in love with the position because of the gear and the idea maybe I was a better backwards skater, and the fact that I just love, stopping players from that opportunity of, coming up with a goal in that sense. Yeah.
Cool. And goalie is such an interesting position. There is a little bit of a stereotype in the hockey world of goalies being a little crazy. Do you think that's true? Do you feel like in your experience goalies are a little bit crazy? Are you a little crazy?
I think I mean, to be totally honest with you, I think everybody's a little bit crazy in the wrong way.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
you
very
definitely
true.
have to be a little bit different to want to stop, pucks that are being shot at you at 60, 80 miles an hour, even 100 miles an hour slap shot, right? And it's kind of funny because I have a lot of friends who are players, and I think that comes up on topic when I meet somebody new who I tell them a goalie, and they're always, their first assumption is that all goalies are weird, but I don't think it's necessarily true. But I mean, maybe I'm just the odd man out, maybe a little bit more normal, what you would say. But yeah, but I mean, you definitely have to be a little bit crazy, I think, to want to get in front of a puck like that. But I mean, I love it, so that's where I'm at. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't like being in front of the puck. I much prefer being on the other side.
Yeah, for sure. I think most people
I did play defense for a couple years, and I didn't really like it. I didn't like facing the puck that way.
Yeah. Nice.
So let's talk a little bit about your Chinese heritage. You've mentioned that's a very an integral part of who you are, and you've talked elsewhere about your Chinese heritage being very important to you. Could you share a little bit about how that cultural heritage shaped your experience growing up in the hockey culture? You alluded it to a little bit a few minutes ago, but maybe expand a bit on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest thing for me is that I never really, as a kid growing up, I spent a lot of time at my grandma's house. We were very close with my mom's parents. And like for me, for instance, when I was young, obviously because my dad's French Canadian, he spoke French or taught us a little bit of French. And it got to a point where I was fluent in it. But at the same time, my mom didn't speak French. So there was a lot of English in between. And then whenever I went to my grandparents' house, who I spent a lot of time with, they spoke or taught us Cantonese. So I was learning Chinese when I was younger as well. So it was that kind of mix, that diversity that I was exposed to. And then obviously, I think regards to being so close knit, it comes from the relationship that I had with my grandparents, and how as a kid growing up, me and my cousins and my brother and I remember how whenever we came back from school, we'd go to our grandparents' house to have lunch or whatever. And, we'd have dim sum, every Sunday. And it was that relationship that I had with them that made me feel that I identified more as being Chinese than French in that sense. But over time, obviously creating this identity, it's obviously I've become who I am because of it, right? Or part of it is from there. That's where it stems from. Yeah.
So you mentioned a few minutes ago that you did see, you grew up around quite a few mixed players, especially of your generation. I think you're of the generation where you're starting to see more and more Asian players coming up in hockey programs, especially out on the West Coast, for sure. How do you feel that might have shaped your experience playing hockey as opposed to, say, hockey players of generations prior to yours?
I think it's that unique situation that my generation's in, just because I think first and foremost, hockey is such a traditional, predominantly white sport already, right? And how a lot of it is kind of gatekept in that sense, especially in the older generations. And I feel like my generation, where we're starting to lead up to that more diversity, and when it comes to players of color, right? I remember growing up and playing against like Arshdeep Bains, for instance, who's playing with the Canucks organization now. And I train with them during the off season in the summers once in a while as well. And how, it's that, obviously there's, when you get to that caliber of professional sports, there's certain players that separate. And it just so happens that, for instance, for him, with Arshdeep, he is one player that's so unique with his skill, skill and caliber and stuff like that. And I feel like as the closer you get to the professional level, the more or the less players of color you see, and I think the biggest part of it has to do with affordability. It's probably a big thing, obviously, just because hockey is so expensive, and accessibility, right? And how I feel like, people of color, when it comes to hockey, they decide to put their kids in other sports because it's a little bit cheaper, right? In that sense. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of what I think off the top of my head when it comes to that, right?
I would agree. I think there are quite a few factors. I don't know if you've read Dr. Courtney Cito's book, Changing on the Fly, and it goes into some analysis about this. We've had her on the podcast in the past, and she analyzes a lot of these sorts of the hockey culture through the lens of South Asian Canadians. And she talks a bit about that and some of the barriers. And I think some of it is what you mentioned, the affordability, accessibility, et cetera. I think there is a bit of that gatekeeping that you were just alluding to earlier.
There is.
And that hasn't left. And I think, voices like yours, experiences like yours, like you were just mentioning, someone like Arshdeep Bains, some of the people like the Robertson brothers, even Nick Suzuki, who might not talk very often about his race, but it's out there in front. I mean, a name like Suzuki. So I think you're starting to see the landscape change a little bit, but it's an uphill battle for people of color, for sure.
I think for sure. Just kind of adding to that, I feel like as a kid growing up, obviously, like for me, for instance, in the community that I grew up in, all my friends were either mixed or they were Asian for the most part. And I feel like when it came to hockey, it was different. It was all my friends became super white in that sense, which isn't a bad thing. But you start to notice that differences, and you don't really pick up on it when you're younger, but especially as you get older, to my age now at 25, it's like that realization that, it is super gatekept in that sense. Yeah. And how you do see on occasion, a few guys who are Asian or, mixed ethnicity, but it's starting to become something of that snowball effect now. That's more. So, I mean, especially like for China, for instance, going to that. Yeah. And I feel like, especially because of the Olympics and stuff like that, how there's that more eye-opening experience because of it, and how China is wanting to develop more hockey, which is opening more eyes to Asian cultures wanting to incorporate hockey into their, maybe put their kid into sports, winter sports as well, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see how the landscape changes over the next
yeah,
years,
and
but
I think some of the visibility of these really high profile players,
for sure.
Hao Shi Wang was just drafted, the first Chinese born player drafted. So this is I think an exciting time, and we're seeing the growth of the game both in Asia and amongst Asian Americans and Asian Canadians too. So
Yeah, no, it really is. I think even this past year, just watching the draft, or I don't really pay attention to it that much, but to see a player of that caliber getting drafted, and just to note on top of it, the fact that he is, of Asian descent, I think it's a massive win for the game as well as for, Asian people in that respect, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We'll transition a little bit and let's talk about your Olympic experience. How did the opportunity to play for Team China come about? What was your reaction when you got that call?
I think this is it's probably the biggest question that I get asked the most often, and I just love telling the story because even now thinking about it, it's one of those things that, oh, you're an Olympian, and it's kind of, I have to pinch myself sometimes because it's like that realization that, I actually did that, But I mean, I grew up playing hockey, obviously in Coquitlam in the Vancouver mainland, but I played back in, I gotta rewind here.
Yeah, no,
but
for sure.
Yeah, well, it's been a while, right? But I believe it was in 2016. I was playing at Delta Hockey Academy, one of the premier hockey academies in the Lower Mainland here, and it was one of those things. Part of the academy, their aim or goal for the players, obviously development as well as developing school at the same time. So it's having that balance. So I remember we had practice in the morning and then workout, and then you head to school. And I remember we finished our ice session. We were just finishing our gym session. We were getting onto the bus, and I got a call from my mom, who one of our family friends, Debbie, she called my mom regarding they needed an extra goalie for this. I didn't really know at the time, but it was this quote unquote camp that they were having, and they just need an extra goalie to shoot on. Okay. So I didn't think much of it going into it. And it was one of those things, and I don't recommend this looking back now. But when I was 16, I ended up skipping school that day. Around noon, we had the practice, and it just so happened we went to the rink, and I just went out there, put my gear on like any other practice, didn't think much of it. Didn't really know what was going on until after the fact. And it turned out to be this Chinese developmental camp that they were running. And it was a selection camp in preparation for the Olympics at that time.
Oh, wow.
So it turned out to be this 3-day process with the camp and how it kind of unfolded. Once I got there, it was one of those things, my mom and we went to the rink, and then our family friend met us there and basically asked us, "You're Chinese, right?" Like this, to confirm with my mom, just because she doesn't, to some people, they might not see her as being, Chinese right off the bat, right? So they confirmed with her, and then one thing led to another. I went and got changed, and obviously they chatted, but I didn't know about this until after. I did my thing, and then Mike Keenan, of course, of all people, comes out and meets me in the lobby, and they basically explained their developmental program they wanted to do with Kunlun Red Star at the time. And one thing led to another. I did really well at the camp. They invited me out to Finland like 2 weeks later. This 16-year-old kid, right, over to Finland to do their training camp, and they wanted me to join their major junior team at 16, and started the process leading into the Olympics. Obviously, just because to give you some kind of backstory with that, at the time, obviously, China won the bid for the Olympics in 2022, and this was back in I believe it was early 2016. They started to want to develop hockey in China, especially being hockey's the biggest sport in the Olympics. So at the time, they kind of obviously wanted to build or put together a hockey team, but they knew that they wouldn't be able to play on that international large stage without help from heritage players. So that's kind of where they started to look for in North America and in Europe for quote unquote, heritage guys to play for the Chinese national team, right? The men's team and the women's team. So they had these selection camps, I believe, in Vancouver, which is one I attended, Toronto. I believe there was one in Boston or down in the US as well. and they selected a bunch of players, and it just turned out that a bunch of the players that played for the men's team that got selected, we come from Vancouver, of all places.
Oh, wow.
So, so that's kind of where it kind of took off, and everything's been an absolute whirlwind since, with getting my first, playing major junior at 16 in the Russian major junior league for 2 years there. And then I played professionally. I got invited to play for their professional team in their system in the VHL at 19 years old. And then from 1920, I played in the VHL. And then I believe it was 2021. I was 21 years old at that time. I played my first KHL game, and then the Olympics the next year. And then obviously after that, the KHL again. And then things have taken off since. Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. I want to zero in on a particular moment. So if I'm not mistaken, you were a starting goalie on home ice at the Beijing Olympics. What was that moment like for you emotionally, personally? What were you thinking, feeling? Could you even think about that moment?
No, that's a great question. I think, to be honest with you, every time I start thinking about it, I get goosebumps or chills in that sense. And I think it was such an impactful moment, and something that, I feel like I'm a big believer that everything happens for a reason, and how a moment like that, whether it's, something that was meant to be, it truly feels like it. And how from that experience, I've learned a ton about myself, about hockey and the culture, and you're more than just one person in that sense, right? And I feel like, obviously, talking about my first start with the national team at the Olympics was, of course, against Canada. And I thought it was a very cool experience, because not a whole lot of people know this, but a month prior to that, I got invited to play for Team Canada. Team Canada selected me to participate in the Channel 1 Cup, which is a tournament they do every year. And it just so happened to be hosted in Moscow that year, where our team was situated. So I got invited to that. I trained with Hockey Canada. And now fast forward to the Olympics now, I'm playing against Team Canada, which just so happens to be 90% of all the players I was training with a month earlier, right? So that, on top of obviously the cultural weight tied to it, just because that I feel like when it comes to hockey in China, it's such a new sport, and it was almost like you're introducing a sport to a country in that sense. Especially playing against a powerhouse like Canada, US, Germany, where we fought against. And I think it's one of those things on top of that added layer of what it means to me and my family as well. My upbringing of being Chinese or Asian and growing up in that household, surrounded by my, Chinese grandparents. And before that year even began, my grandfather, rest in peace, but he wasn't doing so well, and he ended up passing away before that whole season started, that Olympic year. Wow. So obviously it just meant so much more to me and my family on top of it. And I think it was a really special moment to obviously step on, Olympic ice. And, I talked with my sports psychologist about this all the time, how I believe there's a lower chance, or there's a higher chance of, or there's less people who are able to play at the Olympic stage than play in the National Hockey League, right? If that makes sense. So to have that experience of being able to step onto the Olympic ice, not just as a player, but as that starting goaltender and that starting role on top of everything else, and that weight that comes with it. At the time, I didn't really piece things together, but you start to realize things after kind of the fog settles, and how it just meant a ton, obviously, to my family, to myself, and to the game, obviously, right? So it was a super, super special moment. I think in some ways it was very surreal, that even to this day, when we talk about it like now, it's a lot of memories that come back, flooding that emotion, right? Which I think are really special, something I'll always remember.
Piggybacking a little bit off of that, maybe specifically about representing China on the Olympic stage, what would you say representing China on the Olympic stage meant to you, and how has that sort of impacted your own journey in and career in hockey?
For sure. I think in a way, when I think about it now, at the beginning when Kunlun approached me, Mike Keenan, and they brought up the idea of playing professional hockey, they wanted to develop, Chinese heritage players. It was one of those thoughts in my mind. I've always thought of, I just want to play professional hockey. I just want to have that goal of wanting to achieve the NHL. That was my big dream. But then now you're adding that extra layer of, the potential of playing the Olympics now. And it was always that far-fetched dream in my mind, but something that could be attainable, right? And now as we got closer to that season, that year of 2022, it just became more of a reality. And I think in that sense, I didn't really think about it a whole lot. Obviously, to me as a 21-year-old kid that year, I just wanted to play hockey and everything else just happened around me, right? In that sense. But even the mass engagement that we got pre-Olympics and post-Olympics from fans that would reach out, parents that would message me or I'd speak to at the rink and stuff in China, because we lived 2 years in Beijing, or a year in Beijing and a year in Harbin. So I was immersed in the Chinese culture. And I remember they would come, we would have, fans in the stands and we would interact with them after games and whatnot. And how I vividly remember one of the interactions I had with this parent who told me that they didn't know anything about hockey up till that moment. And then they would watch us in the Olympics now. And I think it really opened eyes to this massive population in China that knew nothing about hockey or very little about hockey. And now you want, these parents they want to put their kids into hockey because of us. Possibly, right? That's where it was. So obviously that's that huge impact that you have. That it's almost like, the way I like describing it is almost like a wave, and you're at the forefront of that wave that you're riding. And that's hockey in China, right? And it's such a massive market that's untapped in that sense, right? When it comes to that. So
no, absolutely. So how did playing in the Olympics maybe change or evolve your perspective on the sport, both professionally and personally?
That's actually a really good question. I've never been asked that question before. I think the biggest thing to me is obviously it's just seeing the evolution of hockey in that sense, and how hockey, like I mentioned earlier, is so gatekept in that sense. But now post Olympics, you can see how, like I mentioned, parents, kids, whoever's watching us play now want to be part of that and want to try it at least. And that's a huge impact in that sense. So I think in my mind, when I talk about hockey and Asian culture, that intertwining intersection between the two, it's a really big, thing that it's exciting, right? To watch and to experience and, to see that evolution hopefully get bigger, that snowball effect, right? So
So that actually brings me to my next question. I'm curious about your take on the growth of hockey. Maybe let's look at the big picture here. In these untapped markets, as you say, like China. I spoke recently with Reagan Rust, who's Filipino American, and she spent a lot of time corresponding with the Philippine women's national team. And they just won their first Women's Asia Cup, which is really exciting.
Congrats to them. Yeah. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Of course, the other half of me, because I'm half Japanese and half Filipino, the nice. Japanese side of me chuckles and says, well, Japan wasn't playing in that tournament. So. But it's still incredible to see the growth of the game in these untapped markets. I'm curious about your take on this growth. Are you seeing more youth involvement or infrastructure development in places like China?
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest things, like from what I experienced, obviously when I lived in China, I lived in Beijing for a year and then in Harbin, so northern China. And I feel like hockey pre-Olympics was predominantly only played in northern China, like Harbin, Qiqihar. Those were the main, hubs of hockey. Just because it's a little colder, they had the infrastructure and the facilities for it. And now leading up to, 2020, 2022 now, Beijing, for instance, I believe they wanted to, their goal, their aim before the Olympics was to build 800 rinks across just Beijing. And it got to a point where they blew that number out of the water.
Wow.
And it got to a point where they hit, I believe it was 1,000 rinks in only Beijing. And then they wanted to expand just because of how Xi Jinping really wanted to push hockey, into the market of China, right? And being, arguably the biggest winter sport, they really made that massive impact or massive push for it. And now I believe they've got 100 cities across China that are doing similar things, building. So they're developing the infrastructure for the facilities, the ranks and whatnot. But I think it really goes back to that big thing. Like, for instance, I'm good buddies with the goalie coach for the Philippine national team with the men's side.
Okay.
And he was really close with their GM and obviously the head coach there, and how the Philippines want to develop something similar from my understanding. And it's just that it really comes down to that accessibility where, I've even had, friends, including him, who've talked about, let's just start with road hockey at the grassroots level, right? Just because it's a little easier, just so they can dip their toes in and see if they like it and then involve, from there. But it was the same how in China, for instance, one of my good buddies, Mark Simon, he was probably one of the bigger pioneers when it comes to Beijing hockey, when it comes to wanting to push for the grassroots level and doing it the correct way. And I think what I mean by that is starting at the low level of, let's start with road hockey because it's so much easier. Get these kids exposed to it, especially there's a ton of expats in China that live there, and developing that sense of knowledge, and at least they can get the idea of hockey. And then when they have rinks, it's a little bit of an easier transition between it, right? Yeah. So, but it's exciting, obviously, to see that market in China, for instance, as well as the Philippines. And especially my idea is hopefully that China will get to become a powerhouse like Japan, right? For instance, because I played against them when I was with the national team at the World Championships back in, you probably have to Google it here, but I believe it was 2022 or 2023, 2023, give or take around there. We played against the Japanese national team, and how they developed a system of professional hockey there and developed part of the Asia League, for instance. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but a massive, massive market that they have within Japan, and how they develop this league that's professional. And because of that, all the players from from grassroots all the way to the professional level are getting the development and attention that they need, in order to become what they are right now. And I believe Japan got promoted. So I believe they're in the second highest division for the IHF rankings when it comes to World Championships now, which is I believe fantastic, right? Yeah,
the men's are in the second highest, and I know the women have been in the top division for a while now.
So that's hopefully, and obviously Korea is the same way. Korea's an absolute powerhouse. We've done the national team with China has done multiple exhibition games with South Korea, and wanting to develop hockey. I think the biggest thing that China lacks right now, besides obviously having that infrastructure now, wanting to really push for it, is developing some kind of high caliber league professionally, where other native citizens can actually go to see to expose that post Olympics now. That's the biggest thing. And obviously they're starting to develop that within the Chinese league now, but it's just not getting the same notoriety as it would, if they joined the Asia League, right? For instance, where there's a ton of notoriety with Japanese and South Korean teams, right? So, I mean, there's that excitement to see. You never know how things will pan out in the next 5-10 years from now, but hopefully things will get definitely bigger than they are now, which is incredible.
I like how you brought up the importance of the street game, the road hockey, especially in those markets, because it is easier. I was speaking with Chi In-si, who's the GM and head coach for the Tulsa Oilers Hockey Club. And in a market like Tulsa, that's not known for hockey, not known for cold weather, really, they've had to go into the streets, and that's how they expose kids to the game. And it takes a while, but if you focus intentionally on that aspect of the game, you'll get kids excited eventually about the ice game as well. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think just adding to that, it's one of those things that obviously you have to start from somewhere. So why not start with something that's a little bit easier for
Yeah.
kids to get exposed to, which is road hockey. And I know I've had multiple conversations with Graham Lee, who's the owner of the Victoria Royals in the Western Hockey League, as well as the Delta Hockey Academy, where I played when I was a kid. And he's also a really big believer in wanting to develop hockey in China, just because obviously he's Asian himself, and how he wants to make that push of developing something similar like the Delta Hockey Academy or some kind of hockey academy within China. And I know now, obviously, because he was asking my opinion about it, given my experience with the Olympics and the national team and connections and whatnot, about something like that. So I know the academy ended up doing some kind of system within Harbin and Chichihar, developmental system, so they could test players that are native born Chinese players against North American players to see the caliber of player differences and to see which areas they needed to improve on, or or were already consistent with, right? So having something to go off of, I think was a great start, but hopefully it can get to the point where they develop more the same kind of developmental systems that they have in North America with academies, high school teams, and see how things pan out with the next few years here. But definitely excited about all those things.
So switching from that sort of excitement and positivity to maybe not necessarily negativity, but let's talk a little bit about challenges. What are some of the challenges that you think might exist for players of Asian descent trying to make it into high level hockey today?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for anybody wanting to play hockey is affordability, right? That's probably at the frontmost biggest thing to think about when you want to play hockey or put your kid into hockey is how much it costs. I remember going just last week, I went to the hockey shop, the local hockey shop here. And for goalies, for instance, a goalie stick nowadays costs $400 for the top of the line Bauer goalie stick, right? It's just one stick, right? On top of, goalie helmet, pads, equipment. You're looking at easily between $15,000 to $20,000 Canadian, right? For the equipment, right? And you're looking at players are probably just around the same, right? 10 to 15, I'd imagine, right? For good quality equipment. And how, because of that inflation with equipment, there's also that hesitation with parents wanting to put their kid into it. Obviously, that's, in my mind, the biggest problem that hockey has. Besides that, it's accessibility, right? If you allow kids to have accessibility with rinks and good quality facility and equipment, then it'll be golden, right? But it's just finding that mixed medium between the two. I think it's the biggest challenge that we'll overcome. And then besides that, I think in a sport like hockey, when it comes to Asian countries, it's exposure, really what it comes down to. Exposure at the highest level, because when you gain that interest, everything else will trickle down, hopefully, right?
Yeah, I last weekend I was up visiting my wife's family in Montreal, and we were just wandering around the mall, and we stopped into a Sports Experts, and we saw this little Chinese kid with his parents, and he's trying out his first set of gear. And I was simultaneously excited by that moment and also thinking that's an uphill battle right there. And the affordability is such an issue. And we're seeing some players in the market. I say players, sorry, I mean brands that are players in the manufacturing market that are kind of trying to break in with some affordable equipment. But you've got your Bauer Warrior CCM that basically own the market, and it just keeps getting more and more and more expensive. I mean, 10 years ago, I bought my last pair of skates 10 years ago, and they were $950 US.
Wow.
So
I wish,
I'm like, and that's as a skater. I can't imagine what the equipment is like. And you were saying $400 for your stick, for me, I'm looking at MSRP of like $250 for player sticks. So it's wild.
crazy. Oh, it's super wild. I think it's one of those things that, I mean, the landscape of the world is so different than it was a decade ago, right? And how, imagine 2 decades ago, how things were even, cheaper, and it's different, right? And how things have developed and become what it is now. But I think it's talking about that when it comes to affordability, it's like, I've had multiple conversations with my parents when I started playing hockey, how it was so obviously cheaper, but the quality of the equipment was different, right? And maybe not as protective as well. But there's different challenges that come with different things over time, right? And how, I remember my parents, or my dad, for instance, would always remind me of how expensive gear was when they paid for it for me when I was younger. And I remember vividly when I was younger, around probably 8 years old, begging my parents for a brand new set of goalie pads and, goal blocker and stuff, and how, they end up giving in, right? And it's like they're forking out close to a few $1,000s just for that.
Yeah.
On top of everything else, the training, the ice time. And it really puts into retrospect for me, obviously, getting to that point of maturity level when I talk to my goalie coaches and stuff, and I ask them, because they have kids now that are young enough that they're figuring out which sport to put their kids in, and how they don't even want to put their kids into hockey because it's so expensive. It's too expensive, right? And obviously for me and my, where I am right now, I've been fortunate enough to work with Bauer and, certain reps for brands and get, gear that's been passed on to me, or custom stuff that they pay for, right? And having some kind of partnership in that sense, which is amazing. But at the same time, it's how can we give that to those kids that want to play hockey? You really can't. And there's that massive gap in between the two. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So hopefully in the future, things start to, close up and becomes a little bit more accessible. And I think once that happens, everything else would be, golden in that sense, right?
I'm going to give a plug to some of those organizations out there that are providing ice time and equipment to kids for free, and they're getting donations from the other hockey programs in the area. There's an organization that I coach for here in New Jersey called Hockey in New Jersey, and they focus primarily on the inner city, and a lot of those sort of urban kids who would never, or kids in urban areas who would never have the opportunity to play the sport. They get a chance to try it out for free. So if you're listening to this and you've got a kid who you want to get started on hockey and you happen to live in a city, look around, see if there's a program out there. They're small organizations, so if you don't have a kid and you've got a little bit of money, maybe donate to some of these groups, because they could use the help. But they're doing some good work to get the game out there.
I think on adding to that note there, I think where I live in Vancouver anyways, I know that the local recreation center, they do like donations for equipment and stuff, and that, players in the area will donate gear there. So, people that are a little bit less fortunate that can use that stuff, that secondhand stuff, as well as get it for cheaper as well. I think it's huge. I know that there's also websites like Sideline Swap. Facebook is a great Facebook marketplace that, you can get great quality equipment for a little bit more affordable, right, within your budget, depending on what you're looking at. But for sure, I think goalie equipment is way more expensive than player equipment nowadays.
But you get free ice time in the drop-ins. So.
that is true. So maybe it does kind of weigh out in the end. But
maybe even just a little bit. So if a young Asian kid, whether in Canada, the US, China, or anywhere else, is listening to this and dreaming about playing professionally or internationally, what's a piece of advice that you would give to that kid?
I think the biggest piece of advice I would give is enjoy the moment. If you want to play hockey, dream big. And like for me, for instance, these past few years, I've been helping out my sports psychologist, my mental coach, and I've been mentoring younger goalies. And a lot of the goalies that I mentor or some of them anyways, are Asian or Chinese or Japanese, and how they kind of look up to me in that sense because of my experiences, which is amazing. But at the same time, I tell them all the same thing is when you're playing hockey, enjoy it because it doesn't last. And when it comes to wanting to play professional, dream big because the sky's the limit. There's no ceiling on where you think you could get. You know, like for instance, one of the goaltenders I just started working with last week, one of my new clients, he was playing, I believe, academy hockey, and now he's going into high school hockey in the prep league down in the US. And how before he started working with me, he really struggled with his confidence and stuff like that. So I gave him some advice, and in a way, he told me during our session last week that he wants to play professional at the same level that I played and had that experience because he's also Chinese. And I told him, you know, regardless of whatever path you take, so long as you can look back and be happy with that, that is your biggest accomplishment, because whatever you learn from hockey, it applies to life as well, right? And how, you know, whatever, there's going to be definitely more opportunities when it comes to the professional college junior route in the future than there are now. Like for instance, for me growing up, how there wasn't, the minor hockey system is so different compared to when I was growing up now. And how, just imagine when it comes, that snowball effect gets to, you know, professional level, when it comes to, you know, having those bigger opportunities at the professional level for him and for other, you know, Asian kids out there. So it's definitely one of those things. My biggest piece of advice goes back to just have fun, enjoy it. It doesn't last, right? And I think it's something that we can all, you know, really, really kind of get into there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, before we close up, a little quick fire round. Favorite goalie growing up?
Oh, Carey Price.
Nice.
Yeah,
There
I
we
know.
go.
I saw the jersey. I grew up obviously Montreal fan because of my dad as well.
Cool. That's amazing. I've had a few Habs fans on the show, and that has nothing to do with me being a Habs fan. It's just I got lucky with a handful of Habs fans who come on the show, so that's great.
Well, hey, I think they're arguably one of the better NHL clubs there are. So definitely world class.
Absolutely. Okay. Favorite arena that you've played in, and why?
I think there's two different answers to this question for me. I think obviously the biggest kind of the easy answer for me obviously is the Olympics, the world stage, play on there. I think it was probably the biggest stage I've ever played on, first of all. And the second answer to that, I think, could be Skaz Arena in the KHL, just because they recently opened up, I believe it's an 18,000 seated arena in St. Petersburg, Russia, in the KHL. So to play in an arena like that and just be part of that atmosphere is just so, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible to be there, to hear the chants, you know, and everything like that. But I think the easiest answer for me obviously is the Olympics. Probably nothing will beat that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Your go-to pregame meal?
I don't really have an exact like go-to pregame meal. It's whatever I'm feeling throughout the day or throughout the week, whatever I'm eating. I usually love eating a ton of carbs before games just because I sweat a lot. So pasta, chicken, I'll have maybe not a steak unless it's a few hours before, but something along those lines. Usually pasta is really good, or some kind of stir fry, whatever's going on in the kitchen. Cool.
And then finally, your pregame ritual. Is there a band that's in your playlist that's always there for you? Is there something else that you do in your ritual? Do you kick around a soccer ball? Do you throw a tennis? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, my pregame ritual usually consists of taking a pregame nap, like a few hours before heading to the rink, and then getting dialed in. I use usually either Sense Arena, which is like a virtual reality tool, to kind of track the puck, get my mind and my body moving a little bit, get a little sweat on. Other tools I'll use like Visual Edge, which is like a cognitive tool for eyes and reaction time, to get the brain thinking a little bit before I head to the rink. And then once I'm at the rink, I'll usually warm up. I don't really like playing sewer or kicking the ball around too much, but I'll get a good stretch in, do some kind of mobility exercise to activate all my body and the different mechanics. And then usually music-wise, I have a playlist, like game time playlist, and it usually consists of rock music all the way up to rap. So it's a variety of music.
Okay. Cool.
But usually something that's a little bit more upbeat. AC/DC is always a go-to.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, of course. So definitely on my playlist. Yeah.
Nice. Cool. And then what is next for you, either on or off the ice?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously for me right now, where I'm currently at, I'd love to continue to play professional hockey as long as I can. I think it's the biggest thing that I strive for, right? And right now, like, for instance, earlier today, I was just skating with a group of NHL guys I've been fortunate to skate with and train with this past summer, including like Celebrini, Bedard. I was on the ice with Barzell and those guys. So it was very cool to be, in an atmosphere in a group like that and training. So I've been fortunate enough to work with those guys during the summer, and kind of that's the goal, I think, to play professional hockey. Besides that, I've been doing mentorship with younger goaltenders, working on their mental side of the game, as well as me just giving advice to them, and, an ear for them to speak to in that sense. So, wanting to be in their corner and help these young kids develop into obviously elite goaltenders, but into amazing people as well, right?
Cool.
So.
Awesome. Well, Paris, I want to say again, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us here on the show.
You're very welcome.
Where can people find you if they want to follow you online? Where are you usually posting stuff?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest account that I'm probably on the most is probably Instagram. My tag is POBrien1_. But Instagram is probably the biggest place that you can interact with me or follow me. I'm also on like TikTok, YouTube as well. I'll post some videos on YouTube and TikTok, but it's mostly on Instagram where I'm the most active.
Okay, cool. And we'll go ahead and put the links in the show notes as well. But for anybody who's listening to this while they're driving a car, it's great to have it shouted out as well.
Hopefully not.
Exactly. Once again, Paris, thank you so much for hanging out with us. This has been a blast, and don't be a stranger. We'll be in touch, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
That's it for today's episode. Be sure to tune in next time when I'll be speaking with Yula Idemoto, board president of the Northern California Women's Hockey League and member of Ang Sarap, an all-Filipino women's hockey team in the Bay Area. Thank you so much for listening. Asians in Hockey is part of the Potluck Podcast Collective and is hosted and produced by me, Nate Nakao. Contributing producers are Chad Soon and Chris Wu. If you like what you heard, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and share this podcast with your friends. To keep up with us on socials, follow us on Instagram and Threads at Asians in Hockey, and on Blue Sky at asiansinhockey.com. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/AsiansInHockey. Please feel free to shoot me an email at asiansinhockey@gmail.com, and don't forget to visit asiansinhockey.com for more great content. See you next time on the Asians in Hockey podcast.